Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you might be dialing from around the world. Thank you all for joining and spending time with us for today's webinar, Prove Prefill, How Leading Firms Accelerated Onboarding Times by Up to 79%, presented by Aite-Novarica Group. I'm Caitlin Labby, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. We'll be starting the webinar shortly, but first, let me just cover a few quick housekeeping items. We will be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so please feel free to submit your questions using the questions feature located in the GoToWebinar toolbar to the right of your screen. Also, today's webinar will be recorded, and a link to view the recording on demand will be available after the session. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Shirley Inscoe is a strategic advisor on Aite-Novarica Group's fraud and AML practice, covering fraud and data security issues. Shirley brings to Aite-Novarica Group 30 years of banking experience in enterprise fraud and payments issues. She has served as the chair of the BITS Fraud Reduction Steering Committee and the co-chair of Early Warning Services Advisory Committee, and has been a member of ABA's Deposit Account Fraud and Payment Systems Committees. Shirley has spoken at many conferences on topics related to payments and fraud prevention, and has co-authored a book on internal fraud entitled Insidious: How Trusted Employees Steal Millions and Why It's So Hard for Banks to Stop them. Rodger Desai is co-founder and CEO of Prove. Rodger is a mobile and digital identity expert who has been quoted by publications such as the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, CNBC, Time, and the MIT Technology Review. After beginning his career in engineering management positions at ExxonMobil and GE, Rodger served as an executive at Accenture's telecom practice before becoming CEO of Rave Wireless, a mobile homeland security notification platform deployed at over 8,000 universities, colleges, cities, and emergency management organizations. Rodger is passionate about how technology can solve human and societal issues. In addition to his work at Rave Wireless, his business ventures have ranged from using mobile phones for microfinance village programs in emerging markets to enabling financial inclusion by leveraging Prove's mobile identity technology to allow underbanked and credit invisible consumers to access financial services. Rodger graduated from RPI and attended Harvard Business School. I'll turn the mic over now to Rodger to dive into today's content and talk a bit about Prove Prefill. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope you enjoy today's webinar. Rodger, over to you.
Thank you, Caitlin. So thank you everyone for joining this exciting topic. We know that all the major changes that have taken place due to COVID have driven more and more consumers to digital channels. And one of the biggest problems that we all experience as consumers is just the friction it takes to get simple things done. So we really tried to address a problem that has always been a trade-off, that you could have things that were simple to use, but then they weren't very secure. And now with the added role of privacy, there's even more to kind of balance. And we never kind of believe that there has to be a trade-off between security, ease of use, and privacy. And that's what we really showcase with Prove Prefill, which we'll talk about today. So Prove, like our name suggests, we're really in the business of helping consumers easily identify who they are, so that counterparties like banks and merchants can reduce the friction it kind of takes to do business with them in digital channels. And we think that this kind of role of identifying folks securely, easily, privately, with consumer choice helps every part of the digital journey. So at Prove, we help companies acquire more customers, better engage with existing customers, and doing those things while thwarting, the attackers, the fraudsters, because that's obviously doing that right is what you can do to kind of yield the benefits of having a great experience for customers and growing revenue. We're used by lots and lots of different types of companies. Over 1,000 businesses leverage Prove. So obviously banks, retailers, healthcare, crypto, insurance. We'll be live at scale in 8 countries this year. So we think this is not only a problem for all businesses, but we think it's a global problem that we can help address. So I think everyone can see the screen. So what, one thing we set out to do is we said that, if we can figure out how to create a manner in which we say, well, who owns and operates all the phones in the world, since that's the, leading way that people do business now, we can make it so that if your phone shows up to, let's say a bank in this case, could you just, make it a few clicks and create an account? So the challenge, of course, is, well, how do you know who owns and operates all the phones? Like, the phone companies largely don't know. Most of the world is prepaid, and because of family plans, it's really hard to figure out kind of who owns and operates a phone. But that's what Prove has done. Underneath the hood, we've created these reusable identities that effectively tie an ownership of a phone to a person. And that allows us to do something as simple as this experience. Someone can put in just like their birth month and day, like September 8th, and that will, with the user's consent, essentially pre-fill all their information. Now, the way Prove does this is not what people think. It's not that the phone companies tell us this stuff. Again, the phone companies don't really know. And so we have a unique process of creating these reusable identities and tokenizing them in a way that consumers can simply just put in one piece of information, and then everything happens behind the scenes. It relies on the cryptographic security of a SIM card, so that we know that's this person's phone. Like, you can't pre-fill someone else's information. But we do all this kind of heavy lifting behind the scenes that allows us to create this very easy experience. In one major bank's case, 93% of consumers that are offered the ability to pre-fill say yes to it. And so we think that that gives you an idea of just the take rate or the consumer interest in the product. What was surprising to us, though, is that the 7% of folks who say no effectively are the people that don't want to do it. Let's say my mom, because she's, is new to technology, as well as all the fraudsters. Because if I'm trying to be, Caitlin, but I don't have her phone in my hand, well, I got to say no thank you to Prefill and type in her name. So it effectively provides a VIP lane for the good, which are most customers, most transactions, and kind of sequesters the questionable for further inspection. But right at the front door, versus letting kind of everyone in, including the fraudsters, and then somehow trying to figure that out later. So the results are pretty striking. As you can see, 35% reduction in onboarding, so that there's less abandonment, nearly 80% faster, 29% increase in auto approvals. As I said, 93% of consumers say yes to it, and an amazing reduction in fraud. We even have some clients claiming that the fraud rate is below 5 basis points. Because again, if I'm trying to be someone else and shield identity and apply for an account in their name, well, I'd have to have their phone as well. So we make it kind of the best of both, where we can have really little, very low friction, which creates this amazing throughput and more applications being completed while thwarting all the fraud and doing it in a private kind of consumer opt-in manner. So I think it's the best of all worlds.
Great. And I think at this point, Rodger, we're going to shift, and we'll shift over to you, Shirley, and talk a little bit about the research findings.
It's absolutely amazing how quickly our world can change. Think back to just 2 short years ago, March 2020. COVID-19 was all the talk, and closures loomed across all types of industries: bank branches, retail stores, government offices, etc. The list just went on as people were encouraged to isolate and wear face masks. Vaccines were coming, but nobody knew when they would be available or if they would prove to be effective. One silver lining in the pandemic was that it forced people to do what many bankers and retailers had wanted them to do in recent years: try new products and use online and mobile channels. Millions of people were forced to try online banking for the first time because the branches were closed and wait times for contact centers were extremely long. I mean, in many cases over an hour. This is just one example. Retail shopping was another. As stores closed and shelves were bare at the ones that were still open, many consumers were forced to shop online. Virtual doctor's visits became a thing for the first time, as many people were hesitant to go to their doctor for fear of COVID exposure. Our world changed irrevocably. All those digital newbies learned that they could actually navigate the internet and accomplish what they needed to do. This chart shows that slightly over a quarter of consumers surveyed used online or mobile banking for the first time when the pandemic hit and branches closed. That's an amazing statistic. But as amazing as that stat is, as a reminder, Wells Fargo, one bank, albeit a very large bank, announced they had added over 3 million new digital banking customers in just a couple months after branch closures. As I mentioned earlier, this behavioral shift didn't just pertain to banking. It affected every aspect of our lives. Churches eventually moved to online services. Online shopping skyrocketed, etc. As you can see in this chart, slightly over half of consumers said nothing changed for them with regards to banking. Obviously, they had used online or mobile banking previously and probably didn't go into bank branches often anyway. A lot of younger consumers, my 2 kids, they never go into a bank branch. They don't even understand why they have them. I've been with Aite for 10 years now, and I've learned a few things about American consumers during my time here. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule, but in general, we Americans have very high expectations of security, but we're not willing to be inconvenienced to achieve it. When surveyed, we always say security is very important and answer questions in the way perceived to be quote unquote right. However, in the real world, when push comes to shove, we are impatient and we will abandon an application or a shopping cart in a heartbeat if it's just too cumbersome. Security needs to be as friction-free as possible, but it needs to be effective because our expectations are high. In light of our behaviors, the satisfaction levels shown on this chart are really amazing. About half of consumers who used mobile or online banking for the first time during the pandemic described themselves as extremely satisfied, with many more very satisfied. In fact, only 3 or 4% described themselves as very or extremely dissatisfied. Consumers made it clear they plan to continue to use digital channels for banking. By the way, in this same survey, people who use new products and services were similarly satisfied. Things like mobile deposit capture of checks or contactless cards that were used for the first time during the pandemic were very well liked by consumers. So now, as a result of all this digital activity, our world is changing again. Bank branch closures are at an all-time high. In 2020, banks closed 2,126 branches, which set a record. In 2021, banks closed 2,927 branches, a 38% increase over 2020 and a new record, of course. There's only one little problem. While mobile and online banking work very well for existing customers the majority of the time, banks always need to attract new customers. Completing a new application may be easier on a tablet or laptop, but many people want to use mobile devices for everything they do. I don't know about you, but I can't even type a text message without hitting an incorrect key and getting some crazy autocorrect words, thanks to Apple. Seriously, if I had to complete an entire application for a new account, medical provider, or anything else on my mobile phone, I doubt my patience would allow me to complete the entire thing. I'm a normal human being and time is precious, so I'd likely abandon it after keying the first few fields. If firms want to attract large numbers of new customers, they have to make it very easy for them to open new accounts securely and quickly. Otherwise, those consumers will take their business to a competitor who does. Fortunately, there are solutions that enable firms to make completing an application very easy for consumers. As part of my research, I spoke with executives at 3 different firms that have implemented Prove's Prefill product, and I'll share what I learned. Company A is a very large leading fintech firm. And I spoke with an executive there who explained that his firm used an identity document verification product to verify consumers' identities during the onboarding process. Now, identity document verification is very effective, but there is a lot of friction for applicants. First, they have to take a photo of a government-issued ID, typically a driver's license or a passport. Then they have to take a selfie. If the lighting is poor or other factors lead to a poor picture, they have to try again. This company realized they needed a different approach, so they looked at the market for alternatives. Company A did a lot of testing with Prove to ensure that Prefill would scale to meet their demands and that a very high percentage of consumers would be covered. Response times and other factors were all tested thoroughly. Prove met all of Company A's benchmarks, and the implementation went very well. So as a very large fintech company, Company A has a lot of firms. They offer various fraud prevention solutions too. Now they offer both identity document verification and Prove's Prefill to all the firms they do business with. For very high risk use cases, identity document verification may be necessary, but they haven't experienced any uptick in fraud when firms are using Prefill. As you can see here, the company, and by the way, this is one of the first companies that does business with this fintech, an early adopter who implemented Prefill. And this company was able to dramatically reduce the average time to complete a mobile application using Prefill. On average, they shaved 37 seconds off the time. That's pretty amazing. And as a result, they saw a much lower abandonment rate. Having to key only a couple of fields on the application resulted in more consumers completing the process. And because more consumers completed the application, approval rates increased significantly. This firm was able to approve 94% of the new consumer applications compared to only 73% prior to implementing Prefill. I believe any firm would love to achieve an approval rate improvement such as that. Significantly, the firm was able to accomplish this without an uptick in fraud, which again is very important because, again, we all have those very high expectations of security. Company B is a global payments and lending solutions firm. This firm used Prove's Prefill product as one component of its process for onboarding new consumer credit card accounts. Prior to using Prefill, consumers had to type in all the data fields on the application. Company B used its own internal data and another vendor to perform identity verification. Company B had a strong desire to reduce the abandonment rate during the application process, increase the application completion rate, and contain costs to the fullest extent possible. They looked at various options available on the market, and they provided a number of vendors with a data set for testing. The append rate and the quality of the data returned, that is, names and addresses, won the deal for Prove over the other vendors that participated in the testing. Now at Company B, the consumer only has to type in the mobile number and the last 4 digits of the Social Security number to apply for a credit card. Company B didn't share specific metrics, but executives there stated the append rate was significantly higher after Prefill implementation than in the previous environment. Their application completion rate doubled, which I believe, again, any firm would love to see that. And the company is very pleased with the results they've achieved. In fact, to the extent that this company is now considering expanding use of Prefill to other use cases in their firm. Company C is a leading healthcare firm. In the state this firm is headquartered, there was a state regulation that only existing patients could use the online portal to access their doctor or their account. But in 2019, state law was changed, and this company believed that digital was the way of the future, and they immediately made plans to take advantage of the change in the state law. So they started again looking around for different products that would support them as they expanded usage of their patient portal. To make a very long story short, and because this is healthcare and perhaps not of as much interest to everyone, they did look at quite a few companies before they implemented Proof's Prefill product, but really liked it because of the customer experience that it enabled. In fact, one of the executives said to me, they wanted it to be so easy that someone driving down the interstate who saw one of their billboards could grab their mobile phone, key in a couple of data fields quickly, and register as a new patient. And significantly, it took them only a couple of months to implement Prefill. They started in September of 2019, and by December they were very pleased. They had worked through, the implementation and were ready to go. And they couldn't have been happier that they had all of this done before the pandemic hit. I think you can look at this chart and look at the number of new patient registrations year to year. It's pretty amazing to see the growth that has been fueled with Prefill. Again, this company is extremely pleased with Prefill. One comment I'd like to make about all of the executives that I spoke with, because I am a former banker, I was in banking for 30 years, and one of my responsibilities later in my career, I was the person charged with the responsibility to make sure we were leading edge in my bank compared to our peers in fraud prevention. I was responsible for vendor management and for all the business cases to bring in new fraud prevention solutions. And as I talked to the executives at these three firms, they all spoke so highly of Prove, the process to implement Prove, how easily that implementation process went, how quickly it went, the support that was provided. I literally couldn't believe my ears because I was in banking for 30 years. And as an ex-banker, we always found something to criticize about any vendor. As one executive said to me when I interviewed him, Prove really set a new bar by which we should measure all vendors, because he just was so impressed with the support provided, the team at Prove, their dedication to making sure that the client was pleased with all of the work that was done. I mean, I could go on and on about this because it was so impressive to talk to. In total, I talked to 5 different executives in these 3 different firms, and it was unanimous. Everybody was just so impressed, I guess is the correct word, and pleased with the relationship with the Prove personnel, the work that was done during the implementation, how quickly they were able to implement and start to use the Prefill product, and the ongoing support in terms of listening to feedback, reacting to that feedback, working with them to help solve problems, listening to them in terms of potential new ways to improve the product. Every word I heard was positive, and that is just so rare that I had to take a moment and literally dwell on that for a minute. At this point, I'm going to turn it back to Rodger to talk about the onboarding process a bit more.
Thank you so much, Shirley. So I mentioned we do a lot of fancy stuff underneath the hood to know that this very specific phone that's, let's say, owned by Shirley is behind this transaction. And we know that in real time. Like we'll know, well, maybe, Shirley got a new phone, or maybe Shirley changed her phone number or changed her phone company or lost her phone, or, all the kind of things that can happen to any of us and do happen to lots of consumers. We figure that stuff out in real time, because you wouldn't want a system like this that's super easy for consumers to use to be inaccurate. And so we're constantly creating these reusable identities, these tokens. We're persisting them through change events, and we're really, really good at that because we want to make this seamless for everyone involved. So in this case, when the person ends up at this First Street bank, they at that point we've already figured out that it's Shirley's phone. It's not lost or stolen. Like all the kind of checks that you would expect to happen have already happened. And then there's one challenge question. It could be, again, birth month and day, September 8th. It could be, a part of the national ID, like the last four of a social or something. And that's just one additional check. Like maybe, let's say Shirley left her phone on her desk, when she went to lunch. It's one additional check that we do that our customers can decide if they want that check or not, and what kind of check that they want. Most of them choose one of a check like this, like birth month and day. But that's not really the security part of it. It's really the cryptography behind the scenes that we know for sure that's this very specific phone, which is at this point in time owned by Shirley. And then the consumer says consents and says yes. Of course, they can decline to do that if they want to fill out the form the old-fashioned way, as 7% of consumers do in our data. Then they can, of course, skip this entirely because some people don't want the convenience, but most do. So once that challenge question is entered, you hit continue, and then it prefills name, address, full social. We're adding new fields all the time. This year we plan to introduce email address. But the point is we're trying to put that information in such a way that it's easier for the consumer and the bank can have confidence that, well, it must have been Shirley, in this case Howard, because that person's phone was behind that transaction and all the security that goes in making those checks and those assessments. And to our, as our name suggests, we're proving that Shirley did this transaction, and that's it. And then they can go kind of straight through. Now, you may have noticed on a previous slide, at this point, the bank may say, well, now we'll take this information and we'll put it through a KYC process. So they do CIP AML. We're introducing a new feature that essentially, banks can kind of work with us to ensure that the information that we actually pre-filled, like in this example, has already gone through those KYC checks. So then it can go straight through without having to go through another round of checks that could result in false positives and cost money. This can be make this even more powerful by a couple clicks and the account's created.
So I do have a number of recommendations for your consideration as part of our webinar today. First of all, I would encourage everyone to assess the effectiveness and efficiency of your current onboarding and identity verification processes. This is so vital to the future success of companies in this country. I believe that thoroughly because of this huge shift we've all seen to digital channels. I do believe that American consumers are, we all love the ease of using Amazon. I can go on Amazon and in 10 seconds buy anything I need and know that I'll have it typically the next day. But applying for a new account, applying for whether it's a checking account, a credit card, a mortgage, whatever it is, as a result of the pandemic, not only is the use of digital channels growing, but the fraud has skyrocketed as well. Fraud attempts have skyrocketed. The use of synthetic identities, identity theft, all of these things are major problems for financial services firms and other types of firms as well. So look at your current processes. Look at how well they are working. And then look at your business model, where you want to target customer growth, and strategize about how you can achieve those goals. Since 2017, I have done research every single year that has shown that improving the customer experience is extremely important to most financial services firms. That's where my research has been targeted. I think that in looking at that, people have focused a lot on making an application easy to complete, but they haven't looked at ways to reduce the amount of keying involved, or to quickly and easily know that the person on the other end of that mobile device, tablet, or whatever is who they claim to be. In fact, many times some of those fraud verifications, those identity verifications, part of that is even done in a day 2 environment still, which just isn't going to cut mustard going forward. So I'd encourage you to look at that and really evaluate it again to see how it can be improved. One thing I heard over and over from the executives I spoke with about Proof was that they are always willing to do proofs of concept or other type of data tests against competition or not, so that you can verify with a data set what types of results you can expect. And as one executive said to me, you know, he would never move to a new product without ensuring that it's going to scale and that a high percentage of consumers are going to be covered by the product. Some of the executives that I spoke with told me that they looked at solutions that use knowledge-based authentication as part of the process to verify identity. And they pretty quickly realized that not only is that intrusive, asking those questions of consumers, because let's face it, we've all had KBA questions asked of us that we honestly didn't know the answer to, or there were 2 answers provided that were both equally correct, and we chose the wrong one. So they said that in looking at those types of solutions, they realized that not only were they not improving the customer experience, but they also added a significant amount of time to the process and led to higher abandonment rates. So I think you have to think about all of those things as you make strategies about what you want to do going forward. And then after you've done your proof of concepts, if that warrants a change, determine what the implementation process is going to require, how long it's going to take, and of course, the cost. I have been part of many, many projects, and I'm sure you all have too, that were extremely costly from an implementation perspective. Some of them took months, if not a year. And I'm going to turn it over to Rodger to talk a little bit more about the implementation process in particular, because what I heard from companies A through C was that this was not an extensively complicated or time-consuming process, that it could literally be done in 1 to 3 months. Rodger, I'll turn it to you and let you add or expand or make different points on the recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, what's good is that these are some simple web services. So like in terms of the actual amount of time, like it could be coded up in a day. I mean, if you were like a young new company, obviously the lapse time can be weeks or months, just because of what it takes to get IT projects done at any large bank, merchant, healthcare company. But effectively, it's just a few web services, and that builds in the security, the privacy, the removal of the friction. There's no appliances to install. We have all the what you would expect in terms of SOC 1, 2, PCI, kind of all the kind of things to make sure we meet the standards of compliance of an organization. But yeah, just a couple of simple web services, and that's all.
Okay, anything else you want to add on the recommendations, Rodger?
One thing we are developing is a ROI model, so that people can kind of, we can help them build their business case. And it actually just comes down to some really simple things, like there's a before and after pass rate, and a before and after fraud rate. So for example, I was talking to a bank last week, and their effective pass rate, meaning for every 100 people that want to create an account, how many actually submit their application. They may not get approved, but how many actually get all the way through without some kind of intervention or abandonment or the things that friction causes? And it was 28%. Now, if you assume that nearly 98% of transactions are legitimate, that's the 98% of the time that a card present transaction happens in a store, those are legitimate transactions. So if you use that same kind of rough math, then the delta between 98% and 28% is quite large, right? And each transaction that passes could have a lifetime value of $200, $300, $400, depending upon what kind of account, is a deposit or credit or a mortgage. So so the real trick is how do you get as close as possible to 98% without the fraud going up? And again, the one customer I cited that has got less than 5 basis points of fraud, that's like an ideal case. So you can make, in their case, over $1 billion in incremental sales, because going from like 20, 30, 40% to closer to 98% without the fraud going up commensurately, that's what everyone is trying to achieve. So the ROI model that we'll be publishing should help folks build a business case of what Proof can do for them.
Okay, and that is exactly what I heard from the executives I spoke with, was they encouraged other firms to look around at what's available and do that proof of concept or that data test with Proof. I need to do a quick disclaimer. We at Aite-Novarica Group never endorse any vendor. I am simply reporting what was shared with me by these firms, but it was very impressive because, again, I don't think I've ever talked to users of any product that I didn't hear complaints, either about the product itself or about the firm, their lack of support, their lack of responsiveness, et cetera. And so I just have to say that I was extremely impressed after talking with all 3 of your clients. And so congratulations on that.
Fantastic. So we will go ahead and we will move to our Q&A section. And again, we invite you to add your questions to the question toolbar above. And if we don't get a chance to answer your question, please don't despair. We'll go ahead and we will reach out to you after the webinar and make sure that we have answered all of your questions. But let's go ahead and jump in. And I think, Rodger, some of these are going to be directed at you. So I think the first one is, does the Prefill solution work on mobile phones only, or can it be used if the customer is on a desktop or a tablet?
Yeah, great question. I think the assumption is usually that, hey, Proof only works on mobile. We work in every channel. So it can be desktop, a tablet, it could be a kiosk, it could be a billboard with a QR code. Like every touch point with a consumer, you can use this product. So for example, if you went to the Gap or Lowe's and you can apply for a credit card on your laptop, you'll see that the only difference is when it's not on the phone, then you have to type in your phone number, because of course we don't, like we know who owns all the phones or nearly all the phones, but you need to identify yourself. So you type in your phone number, then there's a variety of ways to then authenticate that phone number is really behind that transaction, and by extension that person. So in one bank's case, they send a smart link, the kind that like Slack and others send. They send a smart link via text message to the phone, and the consumer clicks on it. That does the cryptographic authentication to the SIM card. So we know that phone clicked on that link. And then that'll automatically pre-fill the information on the laptop. So think of like the phone as the remote control that you can then, pre-fill a kiosk, whatever kind of interface you are, even a chat session, a call center. It's just about kind of getting to the phone and authenticating that phone is behind that transaction.
So Rodger, let me ask you a quick question about that. I did, as I was talking to these clients, one of them commented to me that they had started out in the mobile, the mobile channel using Prefill, but they were moving into online in general. So regardless of the type of device, they would be using Prefill. So did your company originally start in mobile? Is that where this this belief that you only do mobile originated, or is it easier to do mobile first, or how do you do most of your implementations?
Yeah, we started in mobile for sure, and then I think that's just because that's where we saw that the future was going to be more and more mobile first. But then I think at this point it's definitely tipped where you can talk to a U.S. like a bank in the U.S. or a merchant in the U.S. and they'll tell you that more than 50% of traffic is now from mobile, maybe 60% or 70%, but that still leaves 30, 40% that's not mobile, and that's why we added other ways to do pre-fill. So we started with mobile, but then we expanded because the reality is that the mobile desktop may never go away. Maybe it'll get down to 10 or 50%, but it'll always be there.
That's what I thought, and it is a conception in the market though, and so I'm glad we were able to clarify that on this webinar.
Yeah.
Thanks, Shirley. Rodger, what does the implementation of Prefill look like? How long does it actually take?
As I said, it's like I think the easiest thing to do is some simple, simple web services that you can call. That's I don't know if we could make it simpler. But again, people, anything that touches the consumer experience, there's always a lot of folks that want to weigh in on that. So there's a lot of socializing of like, okay, well, there's like a top 10 list of questions that we get, like, well, what if this person lost their phone and someone's trying to do this? What if you don't have the data on this person? Like, will this confuse them? So it's typically just trying to work through some of the basic concerns around, like, like, is this too good to be true? Like, what are the downsides? And so walking those things through, everyone has a different kind of consumer experience. And so sometimes we're tailoring it to like exactly how they want to onboard a customer. But at the end of the day, underneath the hood, when the developer gets their, at a given company, gets their hands on the APIs, they're extremely simple.
Okay. And if someone wanted to test out Prefill, how does a data study work?
Yeah, typically, like to me, the way to measure vendors in the kind of identity authentication space is kind of simple. It's basically coverage, which is like, what percentage of adults in a given country can you provide the service for, and then accuracy. So obviously, if 100% coverage, that's great, but if you're wrong 20% of the time, that's bad. Now, in the case of Prefill, and we do, maybe we'll do 80 million prefills this year. I don't know of a case where we've gotten the identity wrong. Now, that doesn't mean it hasn't happened, but it's one of these things where, like, I don't think the market would accept even getting it wrong once. So if I, as a consumer, want to do Prefill and Prefill's like my brother or my old roommate or my wife instead of me, like, those are really bad things. And we get, the phone calls start ringing when something like that happens. And I haven't gotten a call like that. That speaks to the machine learning, the accuracy, the algorithms that our engineers have built to always get it right. So that's like, so the way in which people want to test that claim is that they'll give us a file and let's say, okay, well, here's 100,000 folks and their phone numbers, like, tell us if these phone numbers and people go together. And of course, they're going to give us a file that has, errors in them, so that, to test the claim of how accurate we are, and then we'll provide results and say, okay, these, 84 of these records, the phone number is owned by that person, and for the others, it is not. And that's a way to kind of prove our claim that we're the most accurate platform in the market.
So I think this might be the biggest one that's on everyone's minds. I've seen a couple of these questions come in. If I am a consumer and I'm using Prefill, can I change my information, or how do I edit the form if something's incorrect?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think the way to think about it, and we learned this from our customers, the most important thing, first of all, as a business, that's a kind of a policy decision. So like our customer may say, we want everything to be editable. And some may say, well, we don't want the name to be editable. But the address, of course, especially in COVID, like that could be different. And we could have pre-filled the old address. So it's a policy decision on whether you want to make it editable or not. I will say that when what we see is that if a consumer edits the name, that's that kind of puts you in the bucket of inspect this further. It's almost like the same treatment of folks who say no thank you to Prefill. Are they saying no thank you because they don't want to use it, or because it's identity theft, or what's called true name fraud sometimes? The address, if that changes, they may still inspect it a bit further. But I would make that distinction between changing the name, the identity, versus the address. And it's really just policy decisions, and we help our customers think about that. And we have statistics on, well, how often does that happen, and how much fraud does that result in if someone does make a change?
Well, with that, folks, I think we're at a wrap. Again, if we didn't get a chance to get to your question, we'll reach out and we'll make sure that we answer that. If questions do come up for you, you can always reach us either at info@Aite-Novarica.com or info@prove.com. And on behalf of Aite-Novarica Group and Prove, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. We do hope you have a chance to join us again for our additional Aite-Novarica Group webinar sessions, which you can find on our website under our events tab. And as a final reminder, today's presentation will also be available on demand. Have a wonderful day, and thanks again for joining us.